Imagine trying to diagnose, a highly complex modern genetic disorder.
Right?
But instead of sitting down at a computer with the latest genetic sequencing software, you are handed a medical framework that is, well, 5,000 years old.
It sounds completely wild.
It really does. On the surface, it sounds like an absolute clash of eras. I mean, it's like trying to debug a smartphone using a blacksmith's hammer.
Yeah, and it does seem entirely counterintuitive at first glance. We are so heavily conditioned in the medical research community, to believe that modern biomedical problems require exclusively modern tools.
Exactly.
But there's this growing realization that ancient diagnostic frameworks might actually hold the key to unlocking entirely new ways to understand how a disease progresses over time. And it's simply because they observe the body differently.
Which is really the core of what we're diving into today. So for this deep dive, we are looking at a truly groundbreaking clinical research article published in the Journal of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine.
It's a fascinating piece of literature.
It really is. This study attempts something I just haven't seen before. It takes Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a severe genetic muscle wasting disease, and it conceptualizes it using classical Ayurvedic principles.
And crucially, though, it runs that ancient framework right alongside hard, modern clinical data and molecular diagnostics.
Right. They aren't just philosophizing here.
No, not at all. And the mission of the researchers here is what makes this so compelling for anyone interested in precision medicine.
Yeah.
They set out to see if blending traditional holistic wisdom with, evidence-based cohort data can actually give us a more precise stage-by-stage map of a genetic disease's trajectory.
Because if their hypothesis holds up, that's huge, right?
Oh, it could fundamentally shift how we treat genetic anomalies. It could move us toward highly personalized, tissue-specific treatments that our current, rather blunt medical models might just be completely missing.
Okay, so to understand how they translated this disease across millennia, we first need to kind of establish the modern baseline for you listening. From a purely biomedical perspective, what exactly is happening in the body of someone with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, or DMD?
So, genetically speaking, DMD is an X-linked recessive disorder.
Okay.
It's caused by specific mutations, so that could be deletions, duplications, or even just single-point mutations in the DMD gene.
Yeah.
And the consequence of that genetic typo is a complete lack of a crucial protein called dystrophin.
Dystrophin, got it.
Yeah, and you can think of dystrophin as the cellular anchor, or like a shock absorber for your muscle fibers. It connects the inner framework of the muscle cell to the outer membrane.
And without that anchor?
Without it, every time the muscle contracts, the cell membrane tears, calcium rushes in, the cell dies, and the muscle essentially just digests itself.
Wow, and the clinical reality of that cellular damage is just devastating.
It is entirely relentless. It manifests as severe muscle weakness that usually becomes apparent in early childhood, typically between the ages of, say, 4 and 7.
And because the muscles are constantly degrading, the child loses physical function pretty rapidly, right?
Exactly. By age 12, patients have typically lost the ability to walk and require a wheelchair. And ultimately, it leads to premature mortality, usually in their 20s or 30s, which is driven by severe complications when the disease finally reaches the heart and lungs.
It's just a known genetic error with a deeply predictable, tragic outcome. So how on earth does an ancient system like Ayurveda even begin to process a cellular issue like missing dystrophin? I'm assuming classical texts don't have a chapter on X-linked recessive disorders.
No, they definitely don't have a direct equivalent for DMD. But the way the researchers translated the pathology is just fascinating.
How so?
Well, in Ayurveda, they classified this specific condition under a category called Adibala-Pravita-roga.
Adibala-Pravita-roga.
Right, which basically encompasses hereditary anomalies or congenital defects. And when describing the root cause, the ancient texts use the term Bijabhagavayava dosha. Translated literally, that means a defect in the subpart of the seed.
A defect in the subpart of the seed. I mean, that is an incredibly poetic way to describe a genetic mutation taking place at conception.
It really captures the mechanism perfectly, doesn't it? And the seed defect is said to create an innate progressive imbalance of a biological force called the Vata dosha.
Okay, Vata. I've heard of that in passing, but what does it mean in this context?
So in the Ayurvedic framework, Vata is the bioregulatory force of movement. It governs all movement in the body, from the firing of nerve impulses to the physical contraction of muscles.
Ah,
When Vata is aggravated on a deep congenital level by this seed defect, it initiates what they call a Vata-Vyati trajectory.
which means?
It's a highly destructive systemic progression where uncontrolled movement slowly damages the body's tissues.
Okay, the analogy that actually helped me visualize this translation involves thinking about architecture.
Let's hear it.
So if modern genetics views DMD as like a missing line of code in a software program, the dystrophin protein simply isn't there.
Right.
Then Ayurveda views it more like a structural stress test on a building. The seed defect is a deep flaw in the building's foundation.
Oh, I like that.
And because of that foundational flaw, normal daily activities create chaotic, uncontrolled vibrations throughout the whole structure. And that uncontrolled vibration is the Vata imbalance.
Exactly.
Over time, those vibrations just slowly shape the building apart, room by room, tissue by tissue.
That analogy perfectly highlights the functional difference in the two approaches. Modern medicine focuses heavily on what is missing, the dystrophin, but the Ayurvedic framework focuses on the active, chaotic force that the missing element unleashes within the system. It monitors how that uncontrolled vibration is tearing the building down.
Now, while that theoretical translation is really elegant, the researchers didn't just stop at philosophy. They actually set up a clinical study to bridge these two paradigms with quantitative data.
Yes, they designed a 3-year prospective observational cohort study. They followed 67 boys ranging in age from 5 to 17 years old.
And we really should highlight the modern strictness of their methodology here for the listeners, because they didn't rely on guesswork for the baseline.
Not at all.
Every single participant had their DMD molecularly confirmed using highly advanced genetic testing. We're talking about reading the DNA letter by letter to map the exact deletions and point mutations causing the disease.
And another crucial parameter was that none of these boys had been on steroid therapy for at least 6 months prior to the study.
Why is that important?
Well, modern standard of care often involves heavy glucocorticoids to basically suppress the immune system and slow the inflammation. But steroids alter the body's metabolism, and they mask the natural progression of the disease.
Ah, so it muddies the waters.
Exactly. By ensuring the cohort was free of steroids, the researchers guaranteed they were observing the unadulterated clinical picture of how the disease moves through the body naturally.
Okay, so with this carefully selected cohort, they introduced the Ayurvedic diagnostics. And two of the primary measurements they focused on were Prakriti and Sara.
Correct. Registered Ayurveda physicians evaluated the patients to determine these two baseline factors.
Okay, wait, I'm stuck on something regarding the methodology here.
What's that?
It is very easy to scientifically measure a muscle enzyme in a lab. You draw blood, run it through a centrifuge, count the molecules. But how are these researchers scientifically quantifying a philosophical concept like someone's constitutional typology without it just being, subjective guesswork from the doctor?
That is a vital question for any integrative research, honestly. So Prakriti refers to a person's individual constitutional typology, their inherent lifelong balance of the 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha.
Right.
It dictates their physical build, metabolism, and even susceptibility to certain diseases. But to measure this scientifically, they couldn't just rely on a doctor's feeling. They utilized validated health assessment questionnaires that were specifically tested for internal consistency.
Questionnaires. But how do you score that objectively?
They employed fuzzy logic to score the responses. So instead of a binary yes or no for a qualitative symptom, like are your joints prominent, fuzzy logic allows for a spectrum of degrees.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, it turns qualitative, holistic observations into hard, rankable data sets that can literally be run through statistical software.
So Prakriti is their overall systemic constitution. What is the study measuring when they look at Sara? Is that looking at the physical tissues themselves?
Yes, Sara represents the structural essence or the profound resilience of specific tissues in the body. It dictates a person's physical strength and stability, and they built mathematically validated scoring models for Sara as well,
Okay.
categorizing the boys based on whether their fundamental tissue strength was rooted in muscle, bone, fat, or a combination of those elements.
So once they quantified these ancient concepts, they compared them against the disease progression. And the data regarding Prakriti, that individual constitution, revealed a massive divergence in how the children handled the disease.
It really did. The researchers tracked the timeline of functional decline, specifically looking at how long the boys maintained their ability to walk.
What were the numbers?
The average time to loss of ambulation across the entire cohort was 2.4 years from the start of the baseline tracking. But when they stratified that timeline by the child's Prakriti, a distinct pattern emerged. Children who possessed a Kapha-dominant constitution remained walking for an average of 3.1 years.
Wait, 3.1 years versus 2.4. An extra 9 months of walking might not sound like a huge deal to the average person, but in a childhood disease that moves this aggressively, that is a massive extension of mobility.
It is incredibly significant for the patients and their families.
So why does the Kapha constitution offer this specific protection?
To understand the mechanism, we have to look at what Kapha does in the body. It is the biological force that governs structural stability, cellular cohesion, and tissue integrity. It's responsible for growth, maintenance, keeping the joints lubricated.
Got it.
By nature, Kapha is heavy, stable, and protective.
Which is like the exact opposite of the chaotic, drying, erratic Vata energy that is causing the muscles to break down in the first place.
Precisely. The MD is characterized by rapid inflammatory degradation. It's a fiery, chaotic breakdown of the muscle cell wall. If a child naturally possesses a Kapha-dominant constitution, their cellular environment inherently resists that degradation.
So it fights back.
Yeah, the heavy, stable nature of Kapha acts like a dampening blanket over the inflammation. It obviously doesn't cure the missing dystrophin, but it significantly slows down the rate at which the muscle tissue breaks apart. It acts as a protective phenotype.
That is wild. And beyond the overall constitution, they looked at Sarah, right? The structural essence of the tissues. And the findings regarding bone essence specifically were incredibly striking.
Yeah, they evaluated a subset of boys classified as having astisara. In Ayurvedic physiology, this means having a predominance of bone structural integrity. Your bone tissue, or adesthesi, dictates your musculoskeletal endurance and provides the rigid scaffold for your body.
And these statistics show that individuals classified as having this bone essence had the highest proportion of ambulant individuals. Almost half of them, 47%, were still walking, compared to just 27% in the other dominant tissue groups.
It suggests that a deep inherited resilience in the skeletal structure can significantly buffer the loss of muscle strength.
How does that work functionally?
Well, if the muscles are weakening, a dense, highly stable skeletal frame means the remaining muscles don't have to work as hard just to maintain basic posture against gravity.
Going back to the architecture analogy, if the congenital Vata aggravation is the earthquake shaking the building apart, having a Kapha constitution or a strong bone essence is like the building being outfitted with deep architectural shock absorbers.
That's exactly it.
The genetic mutation is still there, the earthquake is still happening, but the structural resilience buys the building significantly more time before the walls actually cave in.
That is the exact clinical implication. And understanding that timeline of structural collapse is crucial because this study mapped exactly how the building falls down. The researchers used the Ayurvedic concept of Rogavastha, or disease staging, to map how the Vata imbalance invades and destroys specific tissues in a highly predictable chronological order.
So they demonstrated that DMD isn't just this generalized wave of weakness that hits the whole body at once.
No, it's a highly structured invasion.
Let's walk through that chronology,
Yeah.
starting with the early ambulance stage, which the text called the muscle layer stage.
Right. So in Ayurveda, this first stage is Mamsavarta Vata, meaning the chaotic Vata energy is occluded by or attacking the muscle layer. The child is still walking, but showing initial weakness and fatigue.
And there were some really unusual symptoms noted here, right?
Yeah, the researchers noted specific neurological symptoms here, including chronic horripilations, which are goosebumps, and pibalika samkarana, which is the physical sensation of crawling ants on the skin.
Okay, wait. Why would a muscle wasting disease cause the sensation of crawling ants?
It comes down to the nerve endings. As the muscle fibers begin to degrade and die, the nerve endings attached to those fibers become irritated and confused.
Oh, wow.
They begin to misfire, sending erratic signals to the brain that literally feel like tingling or localized movement on the skin.
That is so specific.
It is. And Ayurveda recognized these specific neurological misfires thousands of years ago as the definitive first sign of Vata destroying the muscle layer.
Okay, so as the disease progresses, it pushes deeper. The second stage targets the fat layer.
This is termed Metasavarta Vata. The Vata moves past the muscle and impacts the Dhatu, or fat tissue. The primary clinical symptom that texts look for here is swelling, specifically described as having a heavy, doughy, or unctuous quality to it.
Swelling in the fat layer.
What?
That is super interesting because don't boys with DMD often have calves that look really large and muscular? Like it almost looks like they've been lifting weights even though their legs are actually getting weaker?
Yes. You are describing a phenomenon known in modern medicine as pseudohypertrophy, which literally translates to false enlargement. And this is where the ancient observation perfectly aligns with modern diagnostic imaging.
How so?
When we put a DMD patient in an MRI machine, we see that the calves aren't actually full of healthy muscle. The necrotic, dead muscle fibers have been cleared away by the immune system, and the empty space is literally being replaced by fat and connective tissue.
Wait, so the ancient Ayurvedic observation of doughy fatty swelling is describing the exact cellular process we now capture on advanced MRI scans.
Yes.
The fat is just acting as spackle, filling the void left by the destroyed muscle.
It is a breathtaking clinical correlation. The ancient texts identified the functional consequence of the disease pushing into the fat layer way before MRIs existed. But this stage is still just a precursor to the critical functional cliff of the disease.
Right.
Once the fat layer is compromised, the disease pushes into the third stage, attacking the bone and marrow.
The Vata stage.
Yes. The chaotic Vata moves deep into the skeletal structure. The clinical data in the study showed a massive, statistically significant spike in the symptoms of this stage, precisely as the children transitioned from being late ambulant to early non-ambulant.
Right, as they lost the ability to walk and moved into wheelchairs.
Exactly.
What is physically happening to cause that transition? Why does it hit the bones so hard?
As the muscles become profoundly weak, they can no longer hold the joints in their proper alignment. The skeletal frame begins to bear the brunt of the body's weight without any muscular support.
Oh, that sounds incredibly painful.
It is. This leads to deep, persistent bone pain and joint contractures where the limbs literally become frozen in place. The data firmly establishes this stage as the moment the musculoskeletal system can no longer bear the weight of the disease.
It is just a devastating progression. But the disease doesn't stop at the bone. Once the structural support gives way, what is left for the disease to attack?
This brings us to the final systemic stages of the disease, which Ayurveda maps through the deterioration of something called Ojas.
Ojas. I've heard this term in wellness circles, but what does it mean clinically?
Clinically, Ojas is considered the ultimate vital essence of the body. You can think of it as the deepest reserve of the immune system and the refined product of all the body's tissues working in harmony. It provides systemic strength and resistance to decay.
Okay.
So when the Vata has destroyed the muscle, the fat, and the bone, it breaches the body's final defenses and attacks the Ojas itself.
And the study broke this final siege down into 3 distinct stages of systemic failure. What happens when that vital essence begins to fail?
The first stage of failure is the dislodgement of Ojas. Clinically, this manifests as severe rigidity and systemic edema, or fluid retention.
Why does fluid retention happen at this stage specifically?
Because the circulatory system is failing,
Well,
your calf muscles act as a secondary pump to push fluid back up your legs to your heart.
Right, the muscle pump.
Exactly. When those muscles are gone and the child is entirely sedentary in a wheelchair, fluid simply pools in the lower extremities. The body's vital flow is literally dislodged.
And the second stage?
The second stage is the derangement of Ojas. The vital essence becomes corrupted. The body is exhausting its final energetic reserves trying to repair unrepairable damage, which leads to chronic, profound fatigue and a total loss of functional capacity.
Which leads to the final stage, the complete depletion of Ojas.
Yes. This is characterized by severe, uncontrollable wasting. The body begins to consume whatever remaining tissue it has left just to survive.
And the study explicitly connects this final depletion of Ojas to modern mortality statistics for DMD. How exactly does the loss of this vital essence translate to the end-of-life complications we see in these patients?
The correlation is direct and honestly stark. In Ayurveda, Ojas is fundamentally linked to prana, which is the vital life force residing specifically in the heart and lungs.
Heart and lungs.
Right. When Ojas is depleted, those vital organs can no longer function. Modern medicine knows that DMD mortality is driven by late-stage cardiopulmonary decline.
Because the diaphragm is a muscle.
Exactly. As it wastes away during this final stage, the patient experiences respiratory failure. And the heart is also a muscle. As it breaks down, it replaces itself with rigid scar tissue. a process called cardiac fibrosis. Eventually, the scarred heart simply loses the ability to pump.
Which brings up a really critical question for how we currently manage this disease.
Yes, it does.
If this ancient framework, which is now validated by modern cohort data, proves that DMD systematically sieges the muscle, and then the fat, and then the bone, and finally the vital organs, does that suggest our modern treatments are just too blunt?
That is the exact implication the medical researchers are pointing toward here. Currently, the standard of care relies heavily on throwing systemic steroids at the entire body to generally suppress inflammation.
But if a child is in the early muscle stage, shouldn't the intervention be specifically targeted at nourishing and protecting the muscle tissue rather than just suppressing the whole immune system?
Exactly. And conversely, if the patient has progressed to the bone and marrow stage, where the skeletal frame is bearing the brunt of the disease, the therapies need to pivot entirely.
Right. The focus should shift to supporting bone density, managing joint contractures, and mitigating that deep structural pain.
It is a roadmap for dynamic precision medicine. Interventions should shift based on exactly which tissue the disease is attacking at that specific moment.
It also suggests that throughout the entire progression, medical teams should be concurrently focused on preserving that vital essence, the Ojas, to potentially delay the fatal cardiopulmonary decline at the very end.
It completely reframes how we might sequence therapeutic interventions over the lifespan of the patient. It's brilliant.
Before we conclude, there was one piece of data from the study regarding the mothers of these boys that we really have to discuss.
Oh, the carrier data.
Yes. When the researchers ran genetic testing on the mothers, they found that only 43.9% of them were actually carriers of the DMD mutation.
Which is a massive anomaly. Previous biomedical literature suggests that roughly 60% or more of mothers should be carriers.
Right, and the standard biomedical explanation for this discrepancy usually involves spontaneous de novo mutations, meaning the genetic typo just happened randomly at conception or germline mosaicism.
Yes.
But Ayurveda has an entirely different, incredibly specific hypothesis for why a child might develop a genetic defect without inheriting it directly from the mother's DNA.
They do. The classical texts attribute these non-inherited congenital anomalies to a concept called matrurja ahara vihara. This basically translates to the maternal diet and lifestyle during fetal development.
But how could a mother's lifestyle induce a highly specific genetic mutation like missing dystrophin? I mean, that sounds almost impossible.
It comes down to the sheer metabolic stress of organogenesis. This is the crucial period in the first few weeks of pregnancy when the embryo's DNA blueprint is being actively read and translated to form the initial organs and tissues. The Ayurvedic hypothesis proposes that if the maternal environment is incredibly hostile due to severe dietary deficiencies, extreme stress, or toxic exposure, the cellular transcription process can basically glitch.
Just from the stress.
Yeah. The metabolic disruption is so profound that it induces a spontaneous seed defect, altering the genetic expression of the fetus, even though the mother's original blueprint is perfectly intact.
So it's essentially describing epigenetic disruption leading to a structural genetic error. That is a fascinating mechanism that opens up entirely new avenues for researching maternal metabolic health and its impact on genetic transcription, which really underscores the core value of what this research team has accomplished here.
Definitely. And we really have to emphasize that this Ayurvedic framework is not a replacement for molecular diagnostics. No one is suggesting we abandon genetic sequencing or ignore the role of dystrophin.
Of course not.
Rather, this framework enriches our modern tools. It takes the binary data of a broken gene and gives it a highly structured, patient-specific timeline. It turns a static genetic diagnosis into a narrative arc of functional decline that we can actually interact with and ideally intercept.
It's like we finally have the structural blueprints for the earthquake. We can see exactly which support beams are going to snap and in what specific order, which gives us a localized chance to reinforce them before they break.
It represents a profound shift in how clinical researchers can approach incurable genetic conditions moving forward.
It truly does. So we'll leave you with this final thought to explore on your own. Today, we saw how a 5,000-year-old medical framework could accurately map the pathological stages of a modern genetic mutation like DMD, right down to the fatty tissue replacement and the cascading organ failure.
Right.
If an ancient system can track the destruction of a missing protein with that level of precision, what other modern incurable genetic anomalies might we fundamentally misunderstand right now? Simply because our medical models are only looking at the broken DNA instead of looking at the patient's underlying structural essence and how the entire system is trying to survive the break.